I'm Ryan Riley with the Huffington.
Oh, yeah.
Ryan Riley with the Huffington Post. Obviously, it's your first now. I guess I just want to sort of talk a little bit briefly about how I think one of the biggest things we've seen since Ferguson has been a shift in media coverage, in large part because of things that we've seen sort of through social media. Because I covered sort of some of the work towards criminal justice reform before Ferguson, but being on the ground there, I really think that for both for the reporters there and nationally reporters watching this and covering it, there was a little bit of a shift, and we saw some really bad reporting, especially in sort of on the local level, that I think was insightful for realizing how these relationships develop between the police and the media, and how sometimes, as we've seen in other cases, case in point in Chicago with the video we've seen, where the initial accounts that come out and that are repeated without any sort of skepticism by the media are just fundamentally different from what actually happened in the video. And I think if you took that and how that initial statement got out about, oh, this individual was lunging at the officer when he was shot, that was something that came from a union representative who spoke to someone who, maybe spoke to someone. And it was basically a game of phone tagging being passed down the line. And that's something that the media, that's hearsay. I mean, that's something that the media would never would have repeated. If you had a friend or a friend of someone who was involved in an incident, you're not going to take that account and repeat it. But that's something that has developed, I think, in the media. So I think, and just from being on the ground in Ferguson, when you saw these incidents, that you would see what would happen and what would take place, and then often you'd see a report later that would say, oh, this is actually what happened. Or this person was in the street when you're like, no, they were arrested on the sidewalk and the cops were in the wrong there. Or how to handle the situation, and then you would see a report later. But just often a very big gap and a difference between that. So I think that there have been some shifts, in large part because of social media and how there's been pushback and activists on the ground there, who often, I think, in the case of Ferguson, grew closer relationships with the media than the police did, or at least the national media that came in, because we were sort of dodging tear gas together often. That was a different dynamic that sort of took place, and I think that that's sort of fundamentally changed, I think, for a lot of reporters, how they go about addressing these issues, and not always just immediately accepting the authority and the statement from the police in these controversial cases just because that's what the police say and they're in a position of authority. There's a lot of work to go there, but I do think that's one area where we've seen some change. The other thing I just wanted to, I think that we also saw sort of really broad descriptions of how people, that colored people all together in one group that were really unfair. That, on the one side, when there's a bad cop, it's always that it's a bad apple. But on the other hand, it was like when one person in a crowd that isn't actually an organized government structure that's supposed to be held accountable by voters, somehow there's a different standard. So if one person in a crowd of random people does something wrong, the entire crowd is somehow to blame for it. Whereas on the other hand, it's like if someone who's actually on a government paycheck, who's supposed to be held accountable to the system, does something wrong, oh, it's just a bad apple, you can't blame everybody for that. So I think that that's something that we really have to get away from. And also, I think that there's a change. I've worked very closely with a reporter in Ferguson over the past year, and we've especially done a lot of look into the court system there. And she's someone who grew up in St. Charles County, was one of the only black students in her high school. Her parents moved out of St. Louis County, and now is back in St. Louis County because she wanted basically her child to go to a more integrated school. And was a very young reporter, just out of college, and she had sort of grown up in the system of this municipal court system, which I very highly encourage you to read the Ferguson report, because it really lays out how the structure worked. That when I went in there and saw how this court system worked, it was just completely sort of foreign to me. And I don't think I was completely naive. I covered civil rights for a while. I covered criminal justice, and I knew obviously that there are deep-rooted problems in our system. But it was just something that I couldn't believe was actually sort of happening in America. When you went in there, you saw how the system was sort of working, and there were people who were able to buy their way out of the system and not have to come there every month for their, to actually physically show up to a courtroom every month because they owe $1,000 for letting their pit bull out in their backyard and letting them go to the bathroom, or their grass is overgrown. It's just, and people who had money wouldn't have to show up. But if you couldn't afford $100 a month, you'd actually physically have to show up there, and it would be structured in terms of who who was able to go first was the people who could afford the most money. So if you can't make a payment, you're on a fixed plan, you're on a fixed income, you're going to end up sitting there for like 4 hours every month, and for years probably, because you're not going to pay off this debt. And then if you miss one of those appearances, or if you're even late, they're going to shut the doors on you, not let you in court, and there's a warrant out for your arrest. It was just sort of a thing that was so normal that the reporter that I worked with, Mariah, this is something she was used to. This is just something that she thought was normal, and the local media there, I think, was also pretty ignorant to it. There were some good activists who were doing work there, and some lawyers from the local law school. But this is a system that is still deeply ingrained, and even now there's a fight from a lot of these small town mayors that have a lot of things that are still going on in Ferguson to sort of keep this sort of system going, even with all the exposure. So I do think we have to fundamentally look at our systems, and there needs to be a bigger recognition of just how many problems there are in the media, in the criminal justice system by members of the media. That's really, going to be an important shift going forward, and I think we're going to see more pushback on social media that could help hold media and reporters accountable.
So thank you, panelists.